Development. We'd really love to welcome you all to our State of the Industry webinar. Our first presentation is the 2021 version that was put together by Chris Gould and Edward Kendall. Following their presentation, we shall do a Q&A, and then from there on, I'm Renee Hart and Katie Holder-Vale. We will continue on with the continuation of the State of the Industry and what we propose that we will do going forward, and following that we will have another Q&A. So but first of all, we've got about 15 participants, and it'd be really lovely if we could, before everyone's muted, if we could go through and introduce who everybody is, please. I think we just start at the top. So yeah, please introduce yourselves and let us know what stud book that you represent. That would be wonderful.
To who do you ask this?
I think I should ask all of you, but I'm just not sure how we go about it. How you
maybe start with Rick and work your way down the list. I don't know what your list is like.
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
I see myself at the top, so I will start. And I'm Rick van Miert from Belgium, and I was there from the beginning in the World Breeding Federation for Sport Horses. And I was the vice president for many years. I retired from the board, I think 3 years ago now, 3 or 4. And I still continue to follow the activities of the federation because it's so interesting to see breeding, the changings in breeding nowadays. And I try to follow it as much as I can. So I'm also a member of the BWP, and I'm in the board of, or in the General Assembly of the Zangerzijde Studboek. I'm organizing shows and intersage and free jumping as well. I was judging in South Africa, in the UK. And yeah, I traveled around with the World Breeding Federation meetings. So yeah, now I enjoy very much my grandchildren going to shows. Hope to do it a long time.
Oh, thank you very much, Rick. And who have we got next on the list?
We have Xavier the next.
So should I go ahead? Yes? Okay. I'm Xavier Librecht. I'm formerly a journalist, a question one. I've been one of the 3 founders of the federation. I've been the Secretary General of the federation for 10 years. Then, as Rick, I keep supporting the project. I'm in charge of looking for sponsorship. So we have brought a few partners in the past. Actually, we brought Longines, and we are working hard with Boehringer Ingelheim. When I say we, it means with Eva
Brummer.
Voilà, exactly. Sorry. Who is in charge of marketing for the federation. Well, I mean, whatever we can do, we try. And I think regarding the State of Industry report, I think it's a very important thing. It has been hard work, and for sure, none of us is totally satisfied because still a lot of things are missing, and this is mainly, I think, because the stud books don't consider it as much as we consider it, and don't provide enough information. But for the State of Industry report is a key of development, in my opinion. This is why I joined today.
Thank you. And we can now move down the list.
The Adriana.
Hi, I'm from Germany, or actually I'm from the Netherlands. I work for Breeding News for Sport Horses. I'm a journalist, and I'm really interested in this project because, like Xavier just said, it really gives an interesting insight in how the breeding is developing and with everything that comes to it.
Wonderful, thank you.
Hello, I'm Antonio Melo from Portugal. I'm a breeder of Portuguese sport horses, also rider, and technical and sports director at the Portuguese Equestrian Federation. And I would like to increase a lot all the breeding in Portugal, especially in this level. And I also used to follow the World Breeding Federation for Sport Horses, and I would like to help in a way that I can help all these fantastic movements. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And then do we have John Shenfield? I think you might need to unmute, John.
That's it. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Good. I'm a long-time supporter of the WBFSH. I have 8 mares. We're currently not breeding because of the economic climate. But I'm also an observer and work with a group called the 826 Group, which is the executives of the stud books who meet regularly and discuss the legislation and the problems of the legislation. It's chaired by Celia Clark, and Jane Nixon, the vet, is one of our other advisors. But I continue to support the WBF and its policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our next one.
Carol De Bruin.
Yeah. Hi, you hear us? There we go. Okay, hi, my wife Maria and myself, we run a veterinary clinic and we're completely involved with fertility work for the last 25, 30 years, specifically Warmbloods, that's our interest. So we're in South Africa, and so we're very interested in the state of the industry report. It's fantastic to see. Thank you.
Thank
Excuse me,
you.
Carol, I did not understand you. Can you, Carol? Excuse me. I did not understand you. Hi, how are you, Carol?
Yeah, good. We haven't seen each other for many years.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago. Rick, what I just said, I just introduced my wife, Maria, and myself.
Yeah.
We are from South Africa, and that we run a veterinary clinic, which is completely involved in sport horse fertility, and that we've been doing that for 25 or 30 years. And we're very interested to hear what comes out with the state of the industry report.
Yeah. Thank you, Carol.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, I'm Mindy Hunt, and I'll follow Carol because we know each other well in South Africa. I'm currently chairman of the South African Warmblood Horse Society, and of course we know Rick van Meert very well, so it's very nice to see you there, Rick.
Hi, Mindy.
Hi, nice to see
I
that
hope
you're doing
fine.
and that you are still so involved. Well, the Warmblood Society here in South Africa has grown a little lately. We've managed to hold a few events, and have quite a nice, vibrant group going in the Western Province, in the Western Cape now. So we're in a small growth phase with a lot more interest in the warm blood breeding. Our season, of course, is starting right about now. We've got some mares on the ground, or some foals on the ground already in South Africa, and hopefully looking forward to some more. So it's nice to hear everyone else.
Wonderful, thank you. And then we've got Antonio.
I think Antonio's already gone.
Yes. No, I'm here.
No,
I already
but
did my presentation.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. The names keep changing on here.
Yeah, they do. They keep changing. So who?
Injum, how about that? I don't know. Is that the correct pronunciation? Am I saying that correctly? Injum, Ingem, I-N-G-E-M.
Yes.
You'll have to unmute. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, hello. I'm Inge Madsen. I'm from Denmark.
Oh, Inge, okay.
Yeah, you know me, I think.
Yes.
I am in the Danish Warmblood board for 10 years. I'm working a lot with the young breeders, and I'm actually the president for the young breeders in International Young Breeders. And I'm also chairman for the breeding committee in Denmark. So I'm very interested in that report and hearing what is going on. So thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Have we Adriana?
We did her already. We need Paul.
Okay, Paul. All the faces have gone. And then I think we should, then I think we're nearly done, and then we can start with your presentation, I think.
Yeah, we have Paul, Ralph, and Cassandra.
Yep. Okay.
Paul, are you there?
Okay, we'll go with Ralph. Oh. Okay.
Oh, they seem to have disappeared. Maybe Cassandra wants to introduce herself, and then we'll get started.
Hello, everybody.
Well, there
My
you are,
name's
Ralph.
Cassandra. Oh.
Go ahead, Cassandra.
Sorry, it's Cassandra here. I'm working with Renee and Katie on the second edition of the State of the Industry report, and I'm based in New Zealand with Renee.
Thanks,
hey, Ralph,
Cass.
are you unmuted?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ralph van Venrooy. I'm head of breeding at KLPN and also a member of the executive committee on the WBFH.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ralph, and thank you for all your help. I guess, well, we can continue on now, and thank you again and welcome to everyone. It's nice to meet everybody, and we shall start our presentation. So, Chris, I'll leave it with you.
We're ready to play, Victoria? Welcome, everyone. In this webinar, we will do two things. In the first section, Edward Kendall and I will give you the background about the report, its conception, execution, and purpose. In the second section, Renee Hart and Katie Holder-Vail will consider the future evolution of the report and the longer-term goals. The State of the Industry report is an attempt to paint a picture of the sport horse industry that will provide information and insights to both industry insiders and outsiders. It is laying the foundation for future reports to build on that will improve our understanding and provide a tool for long-term planning and policy development. In this report, you will find fundamental definitions and descriptions of sport horse breeding and marketing. It contains information on trade, production demographics, usage, international health regulations, and comparative information about other horse industry sectors. It also touches on social license issues confronting the industry, such as animal welfare and climate change. To answer how and why this was conceived, I need to put it a little bit into context. While Edward and I were involved with the Canadian Horse Sport Federation in the late 90s and early 2000s, a number of events pointed us to the importance of proper documentation of our industry. Animal identification and foreign animal disease traceability were being contemplated in Canada, as they were in other parts of the world, but in our case, without inclusion of the horse industry participation. Regional land zoning threatened to shut down riding and training facilities close to large urban areas. Horses were the only livestock that was not tax exempt from the newly implemented value-added tax, or GST. And finally, horse operations that were not oriented to meat production were often not included in disaster relief programs such as drought relief. To meet these threats, the Federation transformed itself to include the horse industry and became Equine Canada. A series of surveys were commissioned, and armed with a detailed profile of the industry in Canada, we met with the Minister of Agriculture and various departmental officials. We did not win all of the battles, but we gained permanent recognition for the horse industry as an important part of agriculture. We are included in all funding programs and sit at the table with other commodity groups when discussing animal identification, foreign animal disease traceability and control, and other common issues. It is with this background in mind that Edward and I first raised the concept of a WBFSH-sponsored report that would be a tool for the sport horse industry regionally and internationally. The WBFSH is the only international body that can advocate on behalf of the sport horse industry. For example, through its efforts, we have nearly universal acceptance of the UELN. This was prompted by the international move toward foreign animal disease control through traceability measures, particularly in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. This was a reactive situation, and we were fortunate to have the right idea and the right people at the right time. Next time, we might not be so lucky. We can be proactive and anticipate trends and issues, but to do that, we need to know who and what we are. And that is what this report has tried to lay the foundations for. To give you a better idea of the scope and process that the report represents, Edward is now going to go into some further detail.
So in the next few slides, I'll outline how we got the nuts and bolts part underway, and I'll also indicate some of the problems that we encountered. So how did we get started? Well, we had a lot of discussion about scope. That is, what should the final product contain? We wanted it to be very readable, so its appearance was considered to be important. And of course, we needed to address what at least we thought were the concerns of its potential audience. Later, Chris will outline some of the potential users and the uses of this type of information. But the report was constructed with these in mind. We did not set out to write a report. We set out to create a foundation for what we hope will be a multi-year program within the World Breeding Federation. For this first foundational edition, we needed to determine if we could collect data and calculate metrics that usefully describe the industry and the market and possibly predict future markets. We also asked if we could generate information tools that breeders might need for financial, organizational, and health reasons. And finally, could we quantify the strengths and weaknesses of our industry in the context of the large issues facing breeding, such as welfare and the environment? So the report was then structured to address these questions, and in part to identify the challenges in collecting data on a famously diverse industry. The form of the report was inspired by the elegant publications of international organizations such as Weatherby's and the FEI. Each element of the outline before you was explored. However, not unsurprisingly, some categories, given the time frame and resources, proved difficult to describe, and so we did not make the editorial cut. The first step was to determine how to collect the data, and to be fair, this was an iterative process. In the end, we used the usual sources for such retrospective research. Some historical internal data was available. Although this was fairly sparse, it consisted of the number of registrations self-reported by member organizations during the annual renewal process. Also, many breed organizations prepare annual reports where the membership is described as well as its financial activity. When available, these reports were examined. The contributed data came in large measure from the FEI, who provided activity information for all its member countries. The FEI also has information on the number of Warmblood horses that hold FEI sport licenses. Also, in the activity category, our partner organization, the World Breeding News, provided their auction data. These were primarily reports of European auctions, and that must be borne in mind when considering this data. There are too many online sources to mention, but the OEC is a treasure trove of trade information once you decode the commodity definitions and their terms of reference. We collected a large number of annual reports, and although extracts may not appear in the report, they provided very useful context for the interpretive remarks. Also online were the sources for health information. We were interested to determine how health regulations impacted trade. We were not able to satisfactorily resolve this question, and so this remains an area for future consideration. Although it may seem a prosaic exercise, collating data is a key to efficient report writing. We collected a great deal of data in many different formats. To keep track of everything, it was logged and placed in a data repository. We couldn't use it all, so the most useful information had to be extracted. This winnowing process was performed by content experts. Our research intern, Dr. Ana Filipe, a Portuguese veterinarian, provided the health focus. Chris Gould was responsible for industry and trade, and Nadine Bradner for organizational information. Once the raw data was extracted into a series of spreadsheets, it was time to determine what sort of analysis was appropriate. If you collect data from primary sources, and if those sources have been constrained so that the only variable is the piece of information that you're interested in, then statistical analysis is a great way to perform comparisons. This is a report on a retrospective study. That is, the data was collected by others for their purposes. It was not possible to know the constraints on the data, or in statistical terms, it was not possible to know the variation and bias in the data. Even the World Breeding Federation internal foal registration data was collected for voting purposes, not to monitor horse production. As we go forward, more purposeful data will be done in-house, and this should provide better understanding of the underlying assumptions in the data. For the most part, we chose to include only that data that were verified or that had a high probability of accuracy. We excluded data with obvious bias and data that proved inconsistent with other sources or in year-over-year comparisons. On the latter point, we did publish fall registration information, but included a codicil explaining its limitations. In the next slide, we will look at these limitations. Here we have an example of inconsistent data. Our goal was to understand sport horse production in the global regions identified. The groupings are a bit artificial. The idea was to provide enough granularity so that trends might be noted and not lost in the averaging. Note that the data indicate that most registrations are in Western Europe, and note also that North America has very few. Given the size of the market in the USA at least, this seems improbable. So we need to know how many North American horses are registered in foreign stud books. At this point, we don't know. And that's not all. Note apparently that there was a sudden decline in registrations in Southern Europe. It turns out that this is most likely member stud books redefining what they consider a sport horse. Remember, these data are provided at renewal, and the stud book fees are tied to the number of foal registrations. Now, not to get too caught up in the problems, data contains bias, and that doesn't make it wrong, just as long as the context is properly understood. Here's an example of how important context is. This is data collected by the American Horse Council, an organization that, among other things, actively lobbies the United States government in support of the horse industry. It contains information on the impact of the horse industry on the United States economy. The numbers are very large, but let's look at the racing sector, a $36 billion segment. This data provides a 2017 snapshot, but is that the whole story? If we look elsewhere, we note that the number of racetracks operating in the United States is declining over the period. It's not clear what the underlying cause of the decline is, but nevertheless, they're declining. Furthermore, if we return to the American Horse Council's own data, it reports that the horse industry grew from $102 billion to $122 billion impact in the period 2005 to 2017. However, that roughly matches the rate of inflation, suggesting that the growth was fairly flat. These illustrations are provided to give some sense that rigor was applied to the data included in the report. Although perhaps this reduced the scope and the detail available in this first edition, we are confident in what remains. Future research will attempt to address some of these data challenges. So, on that cheery note, I'll pass you back to Chris to talk about how and why and by whom this data and future reports might be used.
I said at the beginning that we wanted to paint a picture of value to non-insiders. And we think we've done that in producing a document that can be used as a briefing tool when dealing with government agencies regarding policy and funding. It can also be used as a background tool when approaching advertisers and sponsors. And of course, we share it as a taking off point when working with allied groups such as the FEI, animal welfare agencies, and research organizations to address trends and issues of common concern. And of course, we sincerely hope that our member stud books will use it as a planning aid and a tool when dealing with their own government agencies And of course, ultimately, we hope it will become a valuable source of information for breeders to both increase awareness of the broader industry and perhaps to aid in planning their own breeding programs. So the question is, who is this report for? Of course, it's the child of the WBFSH, but as it matures, we hope it will be used by the FEI, national federations, member stud books, allied associations, and by individual breeders. So before we pass the torch, so to speak, to Renee and Katie, we would like to give you an opportunity to ask questions or make comments and before we transition to discussions about the future.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Chris and Edward. So now we go to the Q&A section of the report. So I guess everyone's on mute, and I guess we just put our hand up and then Chris and Edward will answer your questions. Okay. Well, if there's no questions, I guess, Victoria, we can carry on with the next part of the presentation, and maybe after that, everyone may have something to say when they're both put together and we can carry forward. If there's, oh, we've got one. Okay. We've got one question here for you, Chris and Edward. It says, why haven't you considered horse telex or Hippomondo to collect part of the data?
That's a good question, but can you tell me which data would be of interest to us? We know that it's mostly self-reported information. So as Edward had pointed out, we were trying to find verified information for this report. I am having a little bit of a problem with my internet connection, so I'm not sure if you're all able to hear me. Maybe Edward would like to answer the question. Well, the question of contacting, that's a really good progression. When we did the work at Equine Canada, we actually commissioned a survey
that was, by a survey professional. So a questionnaire was circulated to people in the industry. So we were able to actually get a profile representation. I think was over 1,000 people that told us the number of horses, because we had people by age categories. So we had an idea that, for example, somebody in Rick Van Meert's age category is probably planning to have fewer horses, and somebody in his granddaughter's age category is more horses. That I think is a good progression that we might look at a practical way to make this kind of a survey. One of the disappointments is that the transactional data is not available at this point. And I think that's something we need to go to our stud books with and say, I'll give you an example. Again, within our association, we track the number of registrations, but we also track the number of transfers of ownership. And the interesting thing is that there is a ratio, probably 3 to 1, something in that range. So if we have 3 transfers of ownership for every single registration of the year, we have a sense that there's activity. We also track the number of exports. So if each of the stud books were able to collect and report that data, that would be a tremendous ongoing tracking of the health of the industry. And so those are the kinds of things that we would like to do. The other big disappointment was that the national federations, that is within the countries, did not respond to our relatively brief survey. And I think from speaking to Renee and Nadine, we're maybe getting a little bit better response this year with a little help from the FEI. But yeah, these are really interesting questions. And as you pointed out, few of us know who the World Breeding Federation is in terms of the breeder on the street. We've focused our attentions on the stud books and the stud book representatives. And so, yeah, it's a question of how much we want to do directly with breeders. That's always been a question at the table. And so we're looking at this as a kind of a start, as a tool that should eventually penetrate down to the breeders as something of value to them.
Wonderful. Thank you, Edward. Well, I think we can continue on with the second edition of the State of the Industry, put together by myself and Katie Holder-Vale with the help of Cassandra. And then we'll get the Q&A after that, and hopefully it will all mold together for everybody. So thank you. You all right there, Victoria, to send it away?
All right, let's just see here. There we go. Everybody can see that now?
Yes. Oh, perfect.
Thank you all for attending. I'm Katie Holdervale, the Executive Director of the Department of Development, based in the UK, and alongside Renee Hart, the Vice President of the Department, logging in from New Zealand. We look forward to creating the State of the Industry Report second edition. We will be following on from the extensive report that Edward and Chris have published in 2021 to develop what we hope will be current and relevant now to enable the enhancement of the industry for everyone.
I think that's meant to go to next slide.
Our objectives for the second edition are to create constructive and productive engagement between the World Breeding Federation Our objectives for the second edition are to create constructive and productive engagement between the World Breeding Federation of Sports Horses through to its member stud books, their member breeders, the FEI and national federations, and through to the riders. This starts first and foremost by obtaining and recording the correct horse identification information from all parties and leads to the accumulation of correct current data that can be used in more meaningful and beneficial analysis. We want everyone to recognise they are an important part of our industry as a whole, and each are intertwined and have an effect on one another, and the fact that we can all work together to make a better future for all those involved. We wish to provide a report that not only encompasses the current state of the industry, but one that moves into the future. With the next report, we want to highlight emerging challenges, factors and issues that affect the industry, and hopefully this will lead on to identify new ones for the future. Where the first report was more of a snapshot of data, we want the second and the future reports to accumulate into more longitudinal data that we can draw on for industrial movement. Seeing trends over many snapshots in time will enable us to see trends developing and changing, and this can add value to the further development of the industry. Currently, we have seen a positive bounce back of global activities. Perhaps COVID and lockdowns have not been so detrimental as it all seemed at the time. In a quick glance at the data that has been returned from the survey, we have identified a positive increase in breeding. Not only in Europe, but in Asia and Pacific regions, we have seen an increase in breeding and international shows. The world is beginning to open up again. This is a starting point to the second edition report. The Department of Development will look into the statistics of the return surveys and look analytically at how the industry has changed with regards to business and economic movement. Currently, we have seen a positive bounce back of global activities. Perhaps COVID and lockdowns have not been so detrimental. comparing numbers from the first State of the Industry report, we will look into the industry growth within and a comparison between the different countries. We can identify where the trade and movement of horses has happened, and if this has been affected by global activities. We can hopefully look at data around the effects of disease on import and export countries, and also investigate the movement between Europe and the Asia Pacific. With the interesting global events, we wanted to highlight the issues around the psychological welfare of not only the horses, but also of the breeders and riders. The state of the world is relevant to the welfare of the industry as a whole, and it is important to know that our global community is coping and adjusting in a positive way. Within and a comparison between the different countries. We can identify where the trade and movement of horses has happened, and if this has been data around the effects of disease on import and export countries, and also investigate the movement between Europe and the Asia Pacific. With the interesting global events, we wanted to highlight the issues around the psychological welfare of not only the horses, but also of the breeders and riders. The state of the world is relevant to the welfare of the industry as a whole, and it is important to know that our global community is coping and adjusting in a positive way. We are all experiencing an increased cost of living. No one has been immune to this. It will be interesting how the effects of war and COVID have had on the horse industry. The data on the surveys should reflect this impact. Although we might have seen an increase in breeding during this time of unrest, another angle would be to look at if the growth in Europe has also been mirrored in other continents. This topic is one that all the facets of the industry have an interest in. In the second State of the Industry report, we wish to investigate some conditions that we think are at the forefront of the industry now, and some that are worth thinking about for the future. The regional or temporary disease outbreaks that have happened recently are vital to review with regards to future outbreak management. How we can use past experiences to improve the management and response for future events can impact to restrict transmission and protect those we can. There are so many conditions that affect the industry, it is hard to focus on what are the major ones. This, of course, is not a finite list of conditions. With this and future reports, we hope to focus on different conditions that will arise and are currently affecting the industry. We are open to suggestions, and in the questions and answer section later, we hope to hear about what you think is relevant to your horse community in your area of the world. This topic is one that all the facets of the industry have an interest in.
Oh, I think we need to swap over.
In the second State of the Industry report, we In a world where there is a need to be transparent about animal welfare in our industry, we need to understand the needs of members with regards to the public expectations. We need to look at the obligations of the stud books and federations and investigate the legislation and codes of practice around this broad topic. We all have a duty of care for this undertaking. The second edition report would like to look at a snapshot of the global perception of animal welfare and how we can apply the needs of everyone to provide a positive perception of what we do as an industry. We realise there are many factors to look into with this topic, but with a more welfare conscious industry and public, we need to create an environment that is more transparent to the critics and more accountable across all the disciplines. In a word, the second edition of the State of the Industry report We wish to not only highlight the most relevant issues currently confronting our industry, but to be more transparent and accurate with our information sharing. This will create an environment where we can monitor trends, create more longitudinal data, and help the industry plan for the future. We want this report and those in the future to help make our industry more of a success for everyone that shares our love of horses. This next report is being created to help everyone in our industry. So now we would like to hear your views and questions about the second edition of the State of the Industry report. We are now open for comments.
Firstly, I must apologise and thank Victoria. It was a bit tricky, that that slide, but I guess everyone gets the general gist of it. So if anyone has any questions, yeah, please.
Minty Hunt from South Africa. We are not importing quite as many horses as previously, the last year or so, but breeding is still carrying on using imported semen. We have one major problem, though, is that a semen from Germany has been blocked for several years. And it's an issue that we are taking up. We have taken up and continue to take up with our local veterinary health authorities. It does cause a few problems because obviously some of the major bloodlines are the German bloodlines, and we would like to have access to them again. So that's one of our issues. The other issue that that we have as society is that several of the breeders are now registering their horses directly with Zangersider in Europe, and not registering with SA Warmblood. So we feel we don't have as accurate a record as we should have at the moment. And I'm not sure if other stud books have a similar problem or not.
A comment that I might make is that if we can accurately identify the issues, I think that's the important thing. And the point that you're making is that there may be some regionally specific issues that could be included in the report. It could be part of the question. So Canada may have an issue, South Africa may have an issue. And if we may find through surveying this information that we actually have some common issues, maybe by some of the smaller regions. So I think that's a good suggestion to have that information included in the report if that's possible. It's a question of getting to that information. The other point I might make is that I think I'd like to hear from people what statistical information they think would be relevant to carry forward. I suggested that we would like to get the transactional data, the changes of ownership and the export, and I can see import data would be interesting as well. And so if we had an idea that these kinds of information or these kinds of statistics would be important on an annual basis, we can standardize the report to the extent that we have a sort of a stats section where people, as an easy reference, if somebody wants to go to it, it might be an easy way to study, because it isn't always practical or desirable to read a lot of information interpretation around each statistic after you've, once we've got an idea of what the statistics are reporting to us, that's what we want to go to, is directly to that statistical information. And it could be published as such on the WBFS website.
I think, Mindy, it'd be wonderful to have your have all those thoughts in an email, if that would be okay as well, and anyone else that has anything that they may think is relevant, because obviously each year we're also looking at the National Federation surveys, and really all the information in there, it's got to be important to our stud book members going forward, and that is a huge issue in South Africa with semen being blocked, and of course the statistics with the registration. So you won't be the only country that has those issues either. So yeah, going forward, we can add more stuff to give us those statistics.
It's John Shenfield. Can I raise a point, please?
Sure.
Picking up on Chris's point, which I think is very important, in the UK, organisers that have reliable, verified data, and then we have the government central equine database. This has a number of issues that are very strange. Firstly, the contractors obviously want to make it clear that they can do a good job and are doing a good job. Therefore, do not enforce
I'm sorry, John, we can't hear you at all. John, I wonder if you could turn off your video, and that may give you better audio.
The enforcement in the local authorities to actually.
Oh, okay. I think we've now lost John. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that, John. I'm not sure what's happened. Any more? We've got some more questions. And thanks, Mindy. It'd be really good to have that email. Have we got any other questions?
Yes, I have one. Do you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I think this report is very important to organize the future, and not only for, I would say, our generation, but the youngest one. And I think also they should be maybe as much as possible involved in the project, to guarantee that they will be concerned and that we are on the right direction, because their questions are not maybe are not our questions. So what are you going to do regarding this?
Well, this is why we're asking the questions and interacting with our stud book members. I guess the stud book members need to talk to their breeders, and it needs to filter right the way down through, because you're going to have to discuss this with all the new breeders and for future generations going forward. Totally agree. But this first report is a snapshot, so we're open to reassessing and looking at different issues.
Okay.
I'd be interested to hear from people as to what elements they would like to see in the report that maybe aren't there now. And secondly, how do we really make it readable for the breeder? So Adrienne and Xavier, you're journalists. How would you feel we can approach it to increase the readership? Like what's it going to take to get breeders using something and therefore putting pressure on the stud books to contribute the information necessary?
Could be through horse magazines, that at least a part of a report would be published. And that journalists at least know that if they are looking for some trends, information, they could find it in the report. So I think you could, or I don't know who could inform the directions, the boss of those magazines, the best journalists, to have a look to it. Maybe that's something that the board, not the board, but our bureau, our office, WDFSH office should think about. And I think that's an idea. Maybe it's not perfect, but
yeah, and this is a whole information sharing, because this is why I think that we all need to be involved. It's all about our members, it's all about our breeders, and it's about saturation through our industry and getting it to the people and back to us in every way possible. And maybe it is the magazines. We're going to put this obviously in the Breeders magazine as well, the presentations. And it's all about, yeah, pushing our barrow and getting as many people, like someone mentioned before, there's a lot of people that don't understand and don't really know that the World Breeding Federation exists.
Don't you think we're in a go ahead, Xavier.
No, go.
Well, I was going to say that you talked about the other generations, and we're talking about a generation that is digital, online, and barely will read more than 500 words in a row. I think that's our challenge, is to find a way to create these sound bites and the information in as digestible a way as possible without just moving on to clickbait, if you know what I mean. I wouldn't want us to reduce this down to sensationalized distortions just to get people to read it and be interested. But I think we need to find the key to keep it as readable and as simple and as short as possible, with then the opportunity to expand. When we first were conceiving it, we looked at one report that was done by for the COVID situation, and it was a very short report covering the highlights, but within the report, the key terminology or key items, you could click on it to expand it. So if you were reading the report and you really wanted to know more about this particular question or so on, you could click and then it would expand. And, you know, that's a pretty darn readable kind of format for this generation. We didn't go to that format. We went to the normal print, and I think we made a fairly good attempt at it. But I still have that question.
I think we need some young personalities who have the talent, as you say, to deal with this new way of informing, of buzzing. I mean, we should create some buzz around it, even maybe some polemics, so that at least when you say 500 words, that's fine, make it polemic, and then they would sometime go further and try to read the whole thing. But that's the job of young people. I must say that I'm not. You cannot. You have been and you cannot be anymore. I mean, so we should look to this kind of young talent.
I see a chat here that looks interesting. This is Linda Hassan. Would you like to unmute and talk a little bit more about what you're suggesting? Yeah, thank you, Linda. I think that it's nice to hear that the information is of value. And it's nice to hear that you feel, as we all have been feeling for a number of years, that to create the cooperation and contribution by the stud books, that's really what the WBFSH is all about. And it, to a certain level, has been quite successful. And hopefully this report is something that will bring them together more, particularly in terms of sharing their data. We couldn't hear you before, John. Do you want to try again?
Yeah, I was just thinking, going back years back, why do people breed? There are obviously the very serious big barns, as the lady said, which are important, and they're the areas where the major stud books concentrate. And then at the other end of the scale, there's the people who know very little. Somebody's had a horse that's done very well, it's getting old, so they must breed another one from it. And they really haven't got a clue about breeding at all. So they go, and as one lady said at the meeting, oh, well, I go down the road, the man's got a nice stallion, and I give him a bottle of whiskey. So there's that other end, which affects the figures. I think also we need to be very aware, particularly in Europe, of the political situation. I mean, it's quite easy, relatively, I hope, to bring horses from the EU into the UK. It's much more difficult to take horses into Europe. Not only is that, it is extremely expensive. And I think this is a serious issue for people in the UK. And also we hear the government muttering about cutting on government expenditure and cutting EU red tape. And I could easily see them binning the existing passport that we have, which is the European standard passport, and going down to a very much more basic passport, which the stud books or document, which the stud books will have to bind into their own passport, because we need a paper passport when we're moving horses within Europe. That everybody expects to see a paper passport. So all the talk about the electronic passports is very good in certain areas, but generally speaking, for the competition industry, they need a document that a customs officer can pick up, look at, open it, and on page 23, he'll see the information he wants. So I think all of that side of it is quite important for breeding. Obviously, the future technology within the industry and how it will progress is going to be quite fascinating, because we are 2/3 of the way down the road of the embryo transfer side of the industry, and it'll be most interesting to see how the major breeding organisations and major respond to this. But I think all of that side is very important. And as I was saying before, I'm very suspicious of the quality in the UK of the government's responses to these things, because they want their officers who are employed very short periods of time in each department, because they move around dreadfully in the civil service, where when we look at the EU Commission, Dr. Fussell has recently retired, had been there for many, many years and knew this situation backwards. So that's an area. He was a great asset, I think, to the breeders in guiding the way forward, knowing the thoughts of the officials who are concerned with disease control, which is all the legislation is. I'm sorry to bore you, but I just feel quite strongly on these issues.
No, you're right, John. The UALN was a big response to that initial foreign animal disease work around the world, and it was quite a success, I think, for the WBFSH and its allied groups. So I think you're right that we need to be engaged in talking about these different issues that are both regional and international. The other point that you kind of touched on is the technology part. And we certainly talked about that, but we just simply didn't have time and resources. But we do know that most stud books capture the information on the foals in terms of whether they're embryo transfers, whether they are clones, whether they are frozen semen or fresh semen. And I think that kind of statistic would be of extreme interest to most breeders and to the stud books to see where the trends are. For example, in Brazil, when we were there, we saw that at the breeders' show, so that was fascinating to see that right in the competition program. So, and I think they're fairly advanced in terms of the penetration of that kind of technology compared to some other places. So I think that information is there. It's just going to take an effort for us to pull it out of the different jurisdictions.
Yes, it's difficult to get people to record additional information on their databases. I mean, in England, the Central Equine database does not record parentage. I mean, that's astonishing to me, and I'm sure it's astonishing to you.
Well, but the thing is, John, that our efforts have been to make the stud books, who are the authority that identifies the animal and verifies its pedigree, the single source of information. And this, we go back to the question of Hippomundo and Horse Telex and these other sources. These are all self-reporting. And unfortunately, in spite of lots of discussion, the members of the WFSH have not moved rapidly to a good system of data sharing. And yet that, to me, is one of the biggest solutions to the misidentification of horses and to the lack of verification. So I would rather see the stud books retain that role, but share it better, so there aren't competing sources, and that we have improved accuracy. We keep running, I mean, Nadine's not on the call, but we do work every year to try to correct the FEI database. And that's because the FEI database is still self-reporting through the federations, not being derived from the stud books. And we're working on that aspect to, to connect the stud book information with the FEI database. So horses continue to get 2 UELNs or put into the FEI database incorrectly for convenience or for whatever reason. So, I think that's an issue that the WVS is aware of, but needs to stay on top of.
From memory, I think Hanover's been DNA parentage thing foals since 2006. I think it was 2006 they started, but I agree, because the FEI did send out lists for correction by stud book managers of horses and identification numbers, because I couldn't understand why we'd done so well in international competition for Hanover, and we were very well down the rating. And of course, when I went into it, I discovered that the records were quite wrong. Horses had been recorded with the wrong unique equine life number. And of course, that the system, that was dreadful. In fact, we found one horse that had 2 unique equine life numbers, And
We
the
have that
unique
issue.
equine is so important.
Edward, you had a comment?
That's something we have had the same issue in New Zealand here as well, John. So that is something we're all trying to clear up, and through the national federations we're trying to work with the FEI. Well, first and foremost, the data that the national federations are given from the stud books. It's different for us here because we're quite small. We have 2 stud books in New Zealand, but there's many unregistered horses. So but everything else, like from our stud book from Hanover, we are DNA'd, and every horse has a UELN number. But our national federations we will look at as well going forward.
Edward, I think you had a comment.
Hi, everyone. I'll just take this opportunity to pop in while there's a little bit of silence. My name is Sonia. I've recently taken over as head of the Irish Sport Horse Stud Book, and I potentially have the benefit and also the curse of being the head of the breeding department in our national federation. So I'm one of the unique stud books that's set up in such a way that I automatically have full access to the stud book data within our federation. I did miss the first minute or two, so please call me out if I'm wrong. It could be a bit of a political issue because not all stud books worldwide are World Breeding Federation of Sport Horses endorsed. But would it be worth engaging with the FEI, particularly when we think about getting young people involved with the report data on doing some kind of social media releases? I think they generally have quite a good following, and that might support dissemination of this information. I know ourselves, I very recently, and it was actually helped me in filling out this report, just relaunched a business of breeding report for in Ireland. Now, it wasn't specific to the Irish Sport Horse Stud Book, but the numbers looked like over 70% of breeders are Irish sport horse breeders. So it very much reflected kind of the detail of your own report and what we are coming to understand about young people and technology use within the industry. One of the really beneficial pages of our report, which is really helpful, it's a 40-page report, was the key takeaway report or pages. So they were 2 pages with little graphics that kind of bullet pointed the main areas. So say, for example, where there was investment, what kind of environmental measures people were taking, and if they use digital technology or not. And we found that quite useful. Other than that, I know with young people and for us, it's more of a resourcing issue than anything. And they love TikTok. Not necessarily saying that that's where the World Breeding Federation for Sport Horses needs to go, but everything's on Instagram, TikTok, social media. So if they're the areas that you're targeting for additional reach, other than within kind of magazine or reports, and there's resource there, that might be something else. One of the other things that I've tried to do to get increased readership is we share these things in our own e-zine. Now that's organised through Horse Sport Ireland. We have a newsletter that kind of scrapes our main stories every week, and report details were included in that. And that was largely key takeaways, like you mentioned, a 200 kind of word to 500 word piece, and then they could link to the PDF full report if they wished. What I also have the beauty of being able to do, which other people who are leading stud books across the World Breeding Federation for Sport Horses, is if you can share these things, these details to active breeders, at least then they have received the information straight into, say, for example, their inbox or other. I know from my own perspective, it's quite difficult to collect information on frozen or fresh semen embryo transfer and things, because like John mentioned, that's kind of an additional tick box that's not necessarily required in the legislation for registering our horses. Other than that, we saw basically in our report that 80% of breeders use no technology whatsoever, 8%, sorry, which was actually quite a scary statistic for us, because in terms of funding, particularly everything our Department of Agriculture is doing is it's online. So it's precluding, a substantial enough number of people from getting funding. Other than that, myself, how to get younger breeders involved, I try to include them in so much as I can with our stud book activities. So say, for example, getting them trained up as arena party with senior members. I try to have inspector training and include those who've come up through our young breeders program. And I'm really well supported by another government agency here, so that's been really helpful. But yeah, happy to take any questions if anyone has any, and for any other criticisms. And yeah.
Well, the Irish have always had a very active, competitive team that come to the Young Breeders' Championships. And I love your idea of takeaway points. Maybe that's a better way to term it. I was referring earlier to the idea of a summary section, and Renee, maybe you can think about that, because those are the kinds of things that you can then use in your social media outreach. If you
Absolutely.
Have
I've already written it all down.
And what I can do is I'll pop the link for our report in the chat here, and then you'll have it and you can have a look at what those pages look like.
Oh, that's wonderful. And that's the whole idea of having the webinars and following on from what Chris and Edward have done, it's about engaging and giving and doing the statistics of what people really are interested in. And we here in New Zealand, like you in Ireland, we are trying to engage the younger breeders, the younger riders, and the best way going forward with all the children is digital technology and all of social media. And going back to Edward, we're always looking in the rear vision mirror, so maybe it's time for us, you know, to get into this technology and have a lot more on offer to make it a lot more attractive.
John raised the question of why do we breed, and I think it leads to the question of why do we do this report, or why does the WBFS really exist? And I think at the very fundamental point, it is that we want to create and maintain the environment in which people can breed and enjoy and use the horses. And so keeping our eye on the social license issues, keeping our eye on the technological improvements to make things easier, keeping our eye on the market and the growth or decline of sectors is probably, those need to be central to what we're doing in this report. It has to be, hopefully, is a tool to helping us maintain or create the better environment in which the breeders and the horse industry can thrive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just on that point, having the history of a horse's breeding, a lot of good work has been done in tracing various traits and eliminating it. If we look at dogs particularly, you know, the hip dysplasia in dogs, they managed to cut that right back. And I think a lot of the work done by the KWPN on foot problems was also very, very good. And I think that we ought to emphasize the point that the World Breeding Federation breeding history improves the health and long life of the horse. Year-old.
Wonderful. Okay. Okay. Got anything else, or maybe we've come to the conclusion.
So let me ask, well, that leads me to a question to ask you. Some of these Facebook groups are often discussing problems, you know, does anybody know how to breed a mare that only has 3 legs or whatever? And I'm just wondering if and this is a bit of aside from the report, but the WBFSH certainly has connections with a number of very, very qualified experts, certainly in some of the reproductive areas and other things and health. And it also can connect via the sport. Do you think it would be something that people would respond to if they had sort of a consultant expert section, if you were asking breeding questions? Or do you think that's a role that the WBFSH should not appropriately get involved in?
If I could just jump on that, I would agree that a Facebook group is a very good way to get kind of information across and confirmation. I guess the beauty, Chris, if you had experts that you'd be using, is that it would kind of stray away from the fake news element of it. I know in Ireland we have a Facebook group of over 10,000 breeders, and a lot of discourse goes on a lot are in and around there. Now, if you're going to open, say, for example, a World Breeding Federation for Sport Horses Facebook group, just be aware that should these people get involved, there's often a lot of complaining about you too. So say, for example, I wouldn't engage in our breeders Facebook page per se, because more often than not, they're given out rather than them being positive. And look, criticism is very important, because I believe that's how you improve the product, the service, etc., etc. So I don't have an issue with that. There is also a lot of good discourse on breeding in that group too. Now, in the hope that your experts wouldn't be inundated with questions and queries, because it's likely a lot of things will come up over and over again, it would probably be more worthwhile that you would open, say, for example, like an online forum, a Google form, this type thing, where breeders could submit questions once a month, and it would give these experts the opportunity to respond in one concise area, be it via a webinar, via a recording, over text, whichever. It just means that the group's not inundated. Like it was, say, coming out of our report, it wasn't published in there, but over 70% of our breeders are looking at additional training in reproductive methods and techniques. And I mean, certainly in Ireland, no more than that lovely statistic from Germany, like our natural cover methods have gone from nearly 100% to over 70% using artificial methods. Now, that's based on reporting from breeders, but we've seen a big increase, so I think it would be really valuable. And I'm always looking at ways of providing kind of knowledge transfer platforms for our breeders. So it's just something to consider. I think a Facebook group is a really, really good idea. I just think it needs to be managed quite carefully.
Well, I was thinking more along what you were suggesting with the Google thing. If I go online and ask the question, why doesn't my program for this work properly? Many of the applications have their own question and answer kind of section, and those are usually a little bit more specific and are more targeted than random comments on a Facebook group. So yeah. I like your idea where you submit a question. I was just going to throw out the idea that Ingvar Fredriksson was really front and center with the organization for years, and his sons have been super successful internationally in competition. So I'd love to ask Peter Jens a question about the barefoot horses and why they think that's going well and good, and how Sweden is so successful, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I only read an article on that earlier.
Yeah. So Renee, we've been going about an hour and a half. How do you feel?
Yep, I think we probably should be at our conclusion now. And yeah, we have another one later on today. But first and foremost, thank you all for your wonderful comments. And I've written down, we've also recorded. So there's many things that we can take to go forward. Thank you so very much, Victoria, for being the host, and even though we had a couple of difficult slides there, and to everyone for their comments, and also for anybody that would like to email anything, send it through by all means, and we will go through and look at everyone's ideas and see what we can come out with. And there's some amazing ideas, and this is, like I've said before, it's all about engaging all of our members and trying to get as much buy-in as we can, because the World Breeding is for our members. So, and once again, thank you all very much. And thank you so much, Chris and Edward. And I hope we will do your report justice going forward.
And what email address do we use to make comments? Do we just do it directly to Nadine, or do you have a separate one? I feel that I could just give my email address, because I think Nadine's been saturated enough. If everybody's happy to email me directly, that is okay. So I can type a message, I think, and put my email. Okay, I'm typing it now. There you go. That's my email. So if anyone's got anything there, and yeah, and I hope I can answer your questions and do you all justice. Has anyone got anything else before we end?
Yeah, just like to say thank you to one or two people who I haven't seen for a long time, Rick and our Canadian friend. Thank you very much for the work, Chris.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, no question.
Thank you all. Thank you all. It's nice to see you in this discussion. And personally, I think I missed one thing, talking about the horse industry, the auction, and everything what's changing now in auctions was not mentioned in this report. So I think there is an enormous evolution in auctions. Maybe this can be a part in this, have a part in this report. Can this not be interesting? Or
yes,
yeah, I think Renee will probably take a whole list of things, and as Edward and I had to do winnow through, and you won't be able to do them all, but certainly the evolution in auctions and technology is an important area too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then I've written, I've written loads down. So we're going to follow on. And as in our presentation, we have said what we're going to go forward with, some of the conditions of the horses, the OCDs, the shiverers, but by all means, send us through and we will weed through all those. And there's many more reports to come. So we can keep people engaged for many years to come, I'm sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you all very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.